the conversation was about, is there a EU competence to intervene on a generalized obligation of due diligence, which is a bit different than a specific sector, like such as conflict minerals?
Yeah, so maybe actually to add to what Marie said, the most important is that the EU has also the obligation to protect human rights. So that is in the treaty. So obviously it can be done only within the competences, but what you said with regard to the political will, actually it has to be said also towards the Council there is an obligation to act. So, and indeed there has been a recent legal study on the question where actually there would be the competences as highlighted by Marie already in the area of exclusive competences like the trade, it is obvious, but also with regard to the non-exclusive obligations. We have seen already the timber regulation actually a few years back, where the EU has imposed due diligence on companies with regard to the product of timber. So this is connected with the environmental objectives of the EU. But timber and also the conflict minerals regulation, they look both at products that have been produced outside of the EU and are brought into the EU. But if you look actually at the legislation that would determine the behavior of business also inside the EU, you would look at the internal market. And here the EU has an obligation to legislate with regard to maintaining the good functioning of the internal market and to preserve the freedom of establishment of companies. And in this context, we have already seen one legislation, the Non-Financial Directive, which looks into the transparency about due diligence processes. And you can actually argue for such a need to legislate here with, on the one hand, by the calls that actually come from everywhere from member states, but also arguing that it could be disruptive to have very different legislation in different member states, and also from the perspective of consumers and investors that actually there's a need of transparency when you want to select the companies with whom you want to contract and with whom you want to, or from whom do you want to buy a product.